The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, 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 everyone. Steve Richard here, Call Camp. Today we're doing Discovery. It's a popular one, haven't done it in a while. But this time it's what you didn't know about Discovery. It's a lot of things that, we always talk about how good Discovery is so crucial, critical to the sales process, and yet still in the sales profession, we're not doing as good of a job as Discovery as we need to. So this is going to be an awesome lesson today. I'm joined by two of the better minds out there in sales leadership right now, Tibor Shanto in Toronto. Tibor, you want to say hello?
Good afternoon, everybody.
And Mark Kosoglow at Outreach, VP of Sales at Outreach.
What up, y'all?
And Tibor and Mark have worked together in the past, so they got instant chemistry. All I really need to do here is MC and get the hell out of the way, so this is going to be easy. So write down some Twitter handles if you want to do some tweeting at home. We appreciate that. If someone says something insightful, that's great. Also, shout out to my friend David Delaney. He's running a sales development conference with Tenbound in San Francisco, September 21, so he offered a discount code. By the way, if you're watching this and you have some sort of event or something you're promoting that's I'm happy to help spread the word on it. Just let me know on that. So there you go. Call Camp, no space, 25% off. Dishes are done. So let's talk about Discovery. Discovery is a really interesting thing because the human brain thinks at around 260 words per minute. This is the science. But the mouth speaks at somewhere around 130, 140 words per minute, sometimes 110 words per minute. So what's always happening in any buying or selling situation, or really any communication, is you have three conversations that are happening at the same time. There's the conversation that the buyer is essentially having in their own mind. There is the conversation that the seller is having in their mind. And then there's the conversation that the two of them are actually having audibly. And the reason I have this very strange looking picture up is that there's a fascinating bit of research that was done by folks at MIT. I saw this on, I believe it was 60 Minutes or Sunday Morning, one or the other. And it was all about eyes and eyebrows. Eyes and eyebrows, and the ability for someone to recognize a face based on their eyes or their eyebrows. This is a very distinctive face. Some of you probably already know who you're looking at. Others of you might not know who you're looking at. So this is where the eyebrows have been removed. This is where the eyebrows are there. Take a look at those eyebrows. Quite distinct. And here it is, Richard Nixon, former president of the United States. Now, going back to that, thinking about that, the reason I brought this in as a metaphor, I was out running and I was thinking about this topic of discovery. As I said, what happens is, and I hear this again and again with salespeople, even myself, I'm guilty of this in my own calls when I go back and review them. In some cases, you miss these opportunities and you're so focused on your own agenda, you're so focused on the information that you need to gather, the discovery questions that you have to ask, if you will. Those are the eyes. It's just like people are obsessed with eyes of individuals. That's where they think the soul is behind the eyes and all that, the character. But in reality, we're missing in many cases the more important identifying feature, which is the eyebrows in this particular case. So why I thought that was relevant is if you think about discovery, we're all missing things, opportunities where we could do better understanding, have better understanding of our buyers, and by understanding them better, we can ultimately create a lot more value for the buyer, because ultimately it's about creating a great experience and a lot of value for the buyer. So with that as backdrop, it's a little bit of a quirky lead in here. Mark, I'd love to have you kind of riff off that a little bit and then tell what are some of your tips for discovery calls, as you call them, disco calls?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Steve, thanks for having me. Second of all, I don't care if it's about eyebrows. I think your eyes are lovely.
You wouldn't recognize me, though. If you didn't see my eyebrows, you wouldn't even know who I was. How funny is that?
I know every gold fleck you have in those irises. Yeah. So, so for me, you know, Steve, you approached me a couple months ago about being a part of talking about disco calls, and it's really interesting. This is something that we stress at Outreach constantly, and we find that like if you were to set off a series of dominoes, that, you know, if the first 2 or 3 dominoes aren't set up correctly, then it doesn't matter how many you have after that, the whole thing is not going to work correctly. And if you get the disco call right, if you nail it, if you get the underpinnings and the foundation for the rest of your sales process nailed in the disco call, everything else kind of flows from there. So that's why, like, I'm really interested in this topic, something that is a never-ending conversation here at Outreach, because we really view the disco call as the one of the most important calls of the entire sales process. So some things that we do at Outreach. So I have a rep here in our state college offices this week, and I've listened to him do you know, 3 or 4 disco calls and some in-pipeline calls. And you know, we kind of have a rhythm or a way of doing things, a framework, if you will, because scripting, as we all know, doesn't work. So the framework that we do is we actually have, when I do disco call coaching with my guys, is we have a whiteboard in front of us, and we write up there 3 things. The first thing that we do is a T-chart. And that T-chart says on the left-hand side, pain, with underneath that writing align to. And on the right-hand side of that T-chart, it says strength, or solve for. And on the right-hand of the side, it says strength, and we align to those strengths. So to me, this is the first really great part of a disco call. Is not only is your job to find the pain, it's also to find their strengths. So we want to be able to align to strengths as much as we solve the pains. And what I mean by pain too is, a lot of reps I'm noticing these days, even on disco calls that I'm a part of as a prospect, is that they're so excited to get my pain, to figure out like something that's irking me, that they immediately switch into sell mode, and they start to help me to try to figure out how to overcome my pain. Whereas really what I want to do is I want to go deeper into my pain. So we talk about it, the 2nd and 3rd level question. We call it reactive questioning. The minute I ask a question, hey, Tibor, what's the 2 or 3 metrics that you look at every morning? Oh, I look at, you know, did my reps make 75 dials? All right, great. Are your reps making those calls? Well, we get to about 50. All right. Oh, man, I got a pain. I can go solve that. Well, now we ask the 2nd level question. All right, well, how's that affecting your business? Or why aren't you getting to 50? You know, there's a way to be able to ask a 2nd and 3rd level question that helps you understand the pain and the strengths of your people. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you can speak, you can go to high school for 2 years and have Spanish class for those 2 years. And you can become the best Spanish-speaking 11th grader at Washington School, high school that has ever lived. And you could go down and take a trip with your Spanish class to Mexico, and the first time you talk to somebody and ask them where the bathroom, they look at you and wonder what the heck you're saying. And that's what a lot of salespeople do is, listen, you're the best guy, the best seller in your company, but the minute you go try to have a conversation with anybody outside of that, like you can't make sense of, you know, you can't rub 2 pennies together. And so I think that the way that you understand the language and become a native speaker is you talk about how they work every day. And so I want to be able to, the person that is my end user, or the person I'm talking to, is to sit down with them and let them tell me how do you work every day. I want to be able to do their job by sitting in their seat. That's how well I want to know their workflow and how they manage their stuff. That's how I become a native speaker of that company's language and understand their vocabulary. And you know, a lead to me means one thing, could mean something totally different to you, Steve. And so you know, so we roll up that kind of workflow experience with the strengths and the pains. And then that's what earns you the right. So we call it like earning the right for the next call. What's the value that I'm going to bring to the next call? Why will the next call be awesome? And then I can sell the next call happening versus just proposing it by saying, hey, you know, we need to have another call. Does Wednesday at 3 work? That's BS. That's lazy sales. Listen, we need to talk on Wednesday, because when I look at your workflow, what I see is we're going to be able to solve these 2 pains this way and enhance this strength this way. Like, can I show you how you do that inside how your people work every day? That's a strong way to ask for a next meeting. So those are like my 3 tips: is strengths and pains, align and solve, find out the context and become a native speaker by understanding their workflow and how the person that is going to be using your product works every day, and make a strong a call to action on the next call that wraps the context of your solution around how they work.
Awesome. That was phenomenal. And actually, Mark, that was so good that I'm getting a lot of people asking in the audience, hey, am I supposed to be seeing his chart? I want to see the thing he drew. Like, we can actually hear your paper rustling. Would you be willing to, perhaps as a follow-up to this, and we can send this out to everyone after the fact, just whiteboard that in your office there in State College, PA, take a picture of it, and we could send that out to everyone?
Steve, I will take a picture of one right now on my board, and I'll text it to you. And if you want to show it to people in the webinar, you're more than welcome to.
Oh, that's awesome. You know what I think we can do too is to be real avant-garde here. I think I'll be able to even share the file right here in the moment. So if you look in your GoToWebinar panel, there's the deck. This deck is sitting there, so you can download that. But if I can figure out the technology while we're listening to the calls, we'll do the whole dang thing.
Yeah, one of my pet peeves is people talking about crap they don't actually do, and I love proving people that I only talk about shit I do.
There it is. That's it. Half the battle is just showing up and do what you say and say what you do. It's that simple. So, Tibor, you're teed up pretty darn well. So let's talk about some of those steps for discovery that you're known so well for. And everyone, if you don't know who Tibor, he's authored multiple sales books, a very well-known influencer in sales. We're lucky to have him. So take it away.
So thank you, everybody. I guess I'm lucky to be here. I think I pick up where Mark leaves off. So in that first instance, when he talks about really going to those second or third degree questions, drilling down, and we have a process where we go right through those questions and even further. So the first step of a proper discovery is for me to get to where I can discuss with the prospect the future state. So as Mark says, what are their pain points? What are the opportunities, or what are the strengths that we bring to the table? But I got to get the prospect to see beyond where they are now. It's easy to uncover pain. It's there. They're living with it every day. The question is, where do they want to be once that pain is removed? So what's the future state that I can get them both to talk about, because people want to talk about the future, where they want to go and so on, but also get emotionally invested. I think one of the things that Mark alluded to is if we can make that strong pitch for a next step, not just let's meet Wednesday at 11, but why and how that will change their day-to-day reality. The example Mark used was workflow, but there are other things that you can align it to depending on what you're offering and what your service is. But it's really getting them to envision, share with you, and more importantly, emotionally buy into that future state, because a lot of times you might discover the pain, but you'll find that people have given up because they don't believe that there's a means of changing where they are or getting beyond the pain or getting to where they want to go to. So again, in most instances, if you can get them to look past the pain and get them to describe to you what would things be like beyond that, and not sort of in a general way, but what specific accomplishments would they be able to deliver again. So every employee in every company has different KPIs, different obligations that they have. How could your product get them to that future state in a way that they're firing on all engines and hitting all their KPIs and actually exceeding or achieving the things that they set out to do? Once you can get them to do that, once you can articulate that, so one of my favorite questions when I meet with an executive is, if we were sitting here 18 months from now and you were telling me that your team had hit a grand slam, what would that look like? I give them permission to look beyond where they are today and get them to, again, as I say, not only emotionally reinvest in where they want to be, but articulate what that means to them, what that means to them financially, what that means to them in terms of competitiveness in the market. Really explore, and I think Mark makes an excellent point that's really worth repeating, is salespeople will hear something, but they won't go down on it in terms of second, third degree, fourth degree. They won't really get to what's at the core of the issue. And if you stay at the surface, I think that's about the level of involvement that the prospect is going to have in the issue. But if you can drill down and get them to talk about beyond the current pain, then you're going to find that it's really easy to find some of those things that Mark alluded to as to why they want to meet with you again. And by the way, no secret, my third step is also a meaningful next step or right for the next step. But the second step is, what are the gaps? Why aren't they where they want to be? So if I ask somebody a question of what would a grand slam look like 18 months from now, and when they tell me and I sort of explore around the edges, the very next question would be, Mark, so help me understand why we're not there now. And what you'll find is that people will share with you what they perceive at the moment to be in the way of where they want to be. So whether it's the pain, whether it's other things, so you can begin to, as Mark says, align what your solution is to specific things that they've stated that would change their current state and get them to their future state. And I think with the information that you extract from those two steps, and again, that's not two questions, it's two separate steps that will take some time to unfold. And the best way to do it is to really focus on the customer. I always tell people, leave your product in the car and just go in there with a sense of, inquisitiveness that will allow you to explore things and drill down. But once you understood where they want to be and what are some of the barriers in the way, and then focus in on those barriers that you can help remove, then I think you've earned, as Mark says, the right for the next step, but you have to shoot for that next step and lead the process, because the prospects aren't going to do it for you.
A lot of good stuff there. I wrote down, help me understand why you aren't there now. That's outstanding. And then they can start to, because I think what happens is in some cases, salespeople are good at identifying the pain, but they're not good at helping connect the dots on how their solution is going to address the pain. That's where it is. And you can't do that unless you understand their gap, real or perceived. So why aren't you where you want to be now? What's the thing that's stopping you from getting there? Because once you understand that, then you can help address that gap.
And to be quite candid, often what they'll say when they're answering that question are 2 or 3 things that I can really align, almost directly couple with stuff that I'm selling. And I would say that that's the case for most B2B salespeople, that if they just took a step back and actually let the prospect articulate what they see as the barriers or the gaps between where they are and where they want to be, they'll find that the customer actually gives them things that they can now do some further discovery around and drive for that next step that ultimately sets up their close.
Beautiful. All right. So it's time for us to go listen to some calls. That's what we're all about here on Call Camp. We listen to and break down real sales calls. Little did I know, I brought this out for my friend Mark, because he went to he's from Mississippi, but went to school at Penn State. So I was debating between Ole Miss or Penn State, and I picked neither one of them were right. Tell us, who do you like, Mark?
I don't watch college football. I'm a Steelers guy.
Yeah, you should have gone with hockey.
That's good. I was actually at this game, the Ole Miss Alabama game, where Ole Miss was winning 17-0 at the half and then fell apart. It was a sad story. So, all right, let's take it to the tape and listen to a few examples. This is a good opportunity to also pause and see if there are any questions or comments here before we move on. Hold on here. So, Steelers, now we're talking. This is a good question, actually. Before we get into listening to some calls, Neil asks, what about prospects who resist the idea of discovery? They just want to see the demo and solution out of the gate. I'll tell you what, Neil, I deal with that all the time, too. I have a way that I address it. I don't know if it's the best way. So how do you address that balance between a lot of buyers want to see something versus, and they won't even allow you to do this discovery first? What are your thoughts?
I think to some degree there's some conditioning. I mean, if a prospect has been through some terrible calls, then the instinct is going to be, you know what, let's cut the shit and get to what's really at hand here. So I think to some degree you need to just follow your process and look past that, because again, if you've had several bad experiences with salespeople, you're going to assume that the next one's going to be as bad. But if you can persist and stick with your process and show them that you're different just in the questions you ask and the way that you unfold the things that Mark spoke to, I think you can earn the right to have them follow your process.
Yeah, I mean, we get that a lot. You know, when you're selling a software solution, you know, we're predisposition because of, you know, Apple and the App Store and 99-cent apps to like want to get our hands in it and see it so that we can wrap our minds around it. But when you're selling something that requires a level of thoughtfulness, it's really simple. If I try to show you 100 things that our solution does or whatever I'm selling does, and only one of them is relevant to you, why do we just waste 100 minutes going over the one relevant minute? I'd rather talk about the one thing for 100 minutes. So help narrow it down for me so that we can talk about 1 or 2 things for the rest of our time together rather than 100 things in the rest of our time together. Because I'm going to this is what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bunch of hooks out, and I'm going to see which ones you're going to bite. And rather than do that, just tell me what you want to eat, and I'll give it to you.
Oh, that's really good. I love it. So if I tried to show you 100 things that a solution does, it's just going to waste your time. Let's talk about what are the things you need, and then I can show you the 1 or 2 things that are relevant.
Yeah. Now, I'm lucky. I have a killer solution where you want all 100, but like it still doesn't work.
Yeah. That's some good stuff.
That was a joke. You're supposed to laugh.
Hey, Mark, do you ever, I was too busy writing down your insight to laugh at your joke. Do you ever show like a quick peek in the window demo just to give people that quick satisfaction, that quick shot of endorphin before you then circle back and do your discovery later on?
Yeah, so if they push back after we overcome that way, then yeah, like you got to give somebody what they want. You know what I mean? Like there's no reason to like make it be hard to do business with, or to keep the curtain closed when a little peek behind greases all the wheels. So no, we'll show somebody something, but 2 or 3 minutes, and then we're back to like figuring out what they really need to see.
There's a really good agenda setting thing that I learned from Richard Harris that I've liked quite a bit, where in the beginning of a call they'll say, the way this works is I could talk first or you could talk first. And by the way, this is scheduled. This would be a scheduled call. I could talk first or you could talk first, and then let's figure out if there's reason for us to continue. Which would you prefer? And I tell you what, I've been doing that, and you get a very, very clear, I'd rather I talk first. I'd rather you talk first. People have an idea going in, so if you don't ask them, you're not going to know. All right, so Tibor.
Yes, sir.
We're going to begin by playing this interesting call. Now, give us some context on this call.
Which one is this?
This was the, what was it, factoring or something?
Yeah, I thought that this lady started off interestingly. At first, I was wondering because, again, she wasn't as confident or assertive as I like to be on the phone. But as the call unfolded, you saw that she had definitely a plan, and she worked it. And what I maybe was fuzzy on at the beginning of the call, by the end of the call or midway through the call, you could tell that it was her style. And she sort of followed the things that Mark and I have been talking about, where she engaged the person, she tried to understand where he is, but she did a good job of getting him to articulate what he could do if things changed. And clearly she would be, or her product would be, the agent of that change. So I think that there were several times where she just did a really good job and just worked the process and narrowed down the possibilities and took it, again, I think in some ways you can fit her into the models that Mark and I described.
Let's do it.
He does answer.
Hello, Giovanni speaking.
Hi, this is Nicole from Gibraltar. Is this Giovanni?
Yes, from where?
I'm calling from Gibraltar Capital. Have I caught you at a bad time?
A little bit. What's this regarding?
So hold on a sec there. I think in one of the comments I put, I think that if you're making cold calls, which this clearly is, what you're doing at that point is professionally interrupting people. So asking if it's a good time or not is a bit of a useless thing, because it's not a good time by the nature of the call. So bringing that up, I think sometimes you open the risk. I know we're trying to be polite and all that, but we're trying to make the call successful as opposed to win brownie points for courtesy. And I think asking if it's a good time when you're making a cold call is just wrong.
Let's do it. Let's keep going.
Hey, Tibor.
Yes,
just
sir.
real quick. So I think that is this a good time is literally like this reflexive reaction because reps don't have a better way to start a phone call. Like, tell me your.
Yeah, it's social training wheels. They do it because of social conditioning, not because they want to torpedo the call. So I think that, I take a binary approach to a cold call. If it's not going to help me, it shouldn't be in there, even if it's neutral. So what I suggest to my clients is, as a transition, and I literally mean training wheels of going from hello to actually what you want to talk about, say something to the effect of, thanks for taking my call. It acknowledges that you just torpedoed their day, but it doesn't require them to respond, so you can keep going. So something like, thanks for taking my call, or appreciate your time this morning, as long as you're not putting it in the form of a question.
Keep on going.
My favorite thing about a bad disco call is usually that's the last question asked for the next 10 minutes, but well, let's hope this isn't the case here.
No,
Yeah.
she does well. As I say, she turns.
And to be clear, this is a cold call, but it really ends up becoming a discovery call, which does demonstrate that it was effective.
Finance companies, we provide short-term, non-banking working capital solutions to businesses so they could enhance growth opportunities in the company. And I'm curious, if you had some additional working capital available to you right now, how would you use it to grow your business?
There's that future state.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be, set in place. But,
I'm glad I called. Anything in particular or right off the bat that comes to mind?
No, maybe just equipment,
Okay.
Materials, whatnot.
So by not having all the equipment that you would like to have, do you think what do you think that's holding you back from in terms of revenue a year?
It just slows down production. So, we have to have the right equipment, the right people to do the job.
So hypothetically speaking, if you had all the equipment that you wanted, how much more money do you think that you'd be able to make every year with that?
I would say at least 30% more.
Okay. And what are you doing now?
That's pretty wild, huh? Mark, any comments on this?
Yeah, the call's over. She's got it.
Yeah. First of all, how much more money would you make? I could never answer that question on the spot almost about anything. So it's kind of a useless question because all it's going to elicit is a made-up response, which is a fallacy, or it's going to put the person on the defensive because they feel like they should know and they don't. So, and I think that's what he does. He just throws out some BS number, 30%, you know what I mean? That didn't gain her anything. And then also, I would say a little bit, she isn't letting the guy talk. I've heard 2 or 3 times already where she wants to get in her okay, which is her psychological way of interrupting without interrupting so that she can get him to shut up in 2 or 3 words so she can start talking again.
Yeah, I think the question was not necessarily on target, but I think that she was taking it in the right direction in terms of getting him to think. And I think the whole point of a question is to get somebody to think. So I think you're right that especially that type of question, he's just going to throw out a number. On the other hand, if you can reformulate the question but keep the purpose, which is to get the guy to open up and think about things other than his current environment, then I think it does have some purpose, but it could have been crafted better. And I agree 100% in terms of the interruption, especially early on, she was stepping on his sentences.
All right, Tibor, I'm going to jump ahead here to this comment you have here, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's go into this area right around here.
$1,000 tonight.
Tonight?
Yes.
Probably not.
Okay. Then the way that I like to work with my clients is I don't want them to take all of the money all at once because it makes your daily payments higher. I try to do it in ways where it allows you to maximize the most return on investment as fast as you can on the money. So, for instance, I try to keep the payback terms as short as possible. So that's why I did. And don't get me wrong, if you're doing $5 million, you could afford to pay back $150,000 fairly quickly. But I don't want you to take out $150,000 if you aren't going to be using it on day one. So what I would recommend is you would use $30,000 to buy that first piece of equipment. We structure it like that, and then when would you need the next influx of capital, and what would that be for? So $30,000 for the skid. What would the next item be?
What's your percent interest rate that you got? I know they say it's about 30%. You guys are really like.
Well, that's if you keep it for a year.
Okay, let's stop here. So, Tibor, your thoughts?
So the stuff that preceded just before you picked it out is, he was talking about 30,000, and then as he warmed up to the idea, he started asking about 150,000. So I think she scaled it by actually asking him and using scenarios as to what he would use the money for, because again, he started thinking about all the things that he could do with 150,000, and as you heard the tail end of it, she was asking him what would he spend on the money today. So she was, I think, doing a good job of keeping it real. I think a lot of salespeople would have jumped on the opportunity to talk about 150,000. I think she was realistic that the guy's going to pick up 150K, pay a high rate of interest on it, and it's not going to be a good thing. On the other hand, she's able to position this where it mitigates the big interest number that they are going to charge him at the end by tying it back to income that he's going to make. So I thought she managed the scenarios and got him back on focusing on what he could actually use now. And as you heard her say just a second ago, that if he requires more capital, then they can discuss that. So I thought she balanced the scenario with scaling back this wish that he had for 150 into something that was more realistic.
And the interesting thing about that is it ties exactly to what your tips were in the beginning about looking at the future state. So it sounds like she does a pretty good job here of getting him to paint out those scenarios of what a future state looks like, and then align the solution, in this case, like a short-term business loan, against those scenarios.
Yeah, and I would argue based on what Mark said earlier, Mark, feel free to jump in, but she also, I think, again, sort of walked a bit in his shoes. So rather than pumping that 150, yeah, as a lot of salespeople would say, she got him to talk about, well, what is it like to get 30,000? When can you spend it, and so on. So it didn't go quite as far as, immersing herself completely in him and becoming completely fluent in Spanish. But she got him to look at the fact that she's tried to understand things from his point of view and actually turn it to him and say, realistically, is that really where you want to go?
Yeah, I thought that. So whenever you get a good, strong, like inquisitive question like he did, it was a very specific question about 30% interest rates later on. Like he's doing some kind of mental math or
Right.
some kind of something in his brain. She's elicited some thought process in his brain that he needs to resolve now. And so like we can see here how she attempts to resolve that. But I think like she's done a good job getting his brain working, since most people's brains in discos like want to turn off and they're not engaged. This is like really nitpicky and maybe just personal style. But like the only problem I had with this little segment is it got very buzzwordy with ROI and speed to return and this and that. And like, to me, that's like not how normal people talk. Like when I'm talking to my CEO, I don't use terms like that. I'm like, yeah, dude, like it's expensive, but I think we can make the money back in like 3 months if we do this. You know what I mean? And like, to me, when you get conversational like that, people will get more comfortable. And I think like he's so quiet all the time because I literally think like when you talk in buzzwords, people have to run it through their like normal speak filter, and their brain is working overtime to like interpret what you're actually saying instead of just concentrating on having the conversation. But that's nitpicking.
No, but I think it is important in as much as you sort of get the feeling that if you pictured this conversation, it could be either side of a desk. So it has that, I agree with you, it has that formal feel as opposed to being conversational. It's almost like he's in the bank, sitting across the desk from the bank, or being interviewed. And I think if she took it down a bit and was more herself as opposed to her script, that would be much more casual.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've had, I'm just looking at the questions as you guys are talking through this. I've had a couple people ask, is this a real cold call or is this a real call? The answer is yes. Every call on CallCamp is submitted and real. And actually, I'll just jump ahead to this while we're on that topic. If you ever want to submit a call to get coaching from people like Mark and Tibor, I mean, heck, that's pretty cool to get that for free. I'm gonna send the link out here in the question to everyone, so you can submit a call in the future that way. And you can always submit a call for CallCamp. We love getting your calls. This is the essence of the whole thing. All right, so with that, how about we jump into the next one? Hold on, let me just text this here or chat this to the audience now. Everyone should have that link. Let's go to the next one, which is Tibor. We're going up here to the BAE Systems call.
Right.
Or actually, you know what? Before we do that, did you want? I can already hear you getting uncomfortable. Did you want to?
Not me, the sales guy.
Did you want to finish up this concrete one here?
No, I think, she continues well. I think, from a quality of the discovery call and so on, it doesn't change. So I think that if she changed some of the things that we commented on and maybe, accelerate or at least emphasize some of the other things, I think overall she did a good job of starting off a little bit sort of fuzzy and then really focusing down on what she wanted. And I think she earned the right for the next step, as I recall.
Right. Very good. All right. Let's jump ahead to the call into BAE Systems. And I'm going to go right to the start of the call here.
So all I really need to do is have a chat with you for 5 or 10 minutes, to ask you a few questions.
So can you put on hold?
Yeah. Can you do that, by the way? Or is it too quiet?
It's a little quiet.
So one of my pet peeves, I hate the word just because we try and minimize this thing. And he starts off by saying that he's just looking for 5 minutes and the call is, 26 minutes? I think part of our job as salespeople is to set the right expectation. And, if you know you're going to need a half hour, then say that.
Yeah, and if you look at this, there's a lot of justs that align with actually both sides, the buyer and the seller in this case. So completely agree with that one. Let's do it. And we're going to have to lean into this call a little bit because this is as loud as it goes. It's just a little bit of a quieter audio file we had in the first place.
Yeah, so pretty much then, the information there, then I think our regional director, Keith Box, will probably do the presentation for you. With that being said, so I was looking at your company, BAE Systems. You're based out of Virginia, is that correct?
That's where on the internet.
Go ahead, guys.
I was going to say, isn't the information of where they are on the internet? Like, this guy just doesn't sound prepared to have a serious discovery call. I mean, discovery is a serious business, and this guy just, is not ready for it, as will be evident as we go through the call.
Where you located is not good. It's not good. Actually, Mark, this is a good time to bring up, seeing as we don't want to completely skewer this fine gentleman who submitted his call. This is a good time to bring up the shit sandwich thing you were talking about before. You want to jump in with that?
Yeah. So, I've tried to be very sensitive to how each individual person on my team wants to be coached, but there's certain things that I just refuse to do. And early in my career when I was coaching people, I used the shit sandwich approach. Say something great, say something shitty about you, say something great. I think everybody can see that thing coming a mile away, and the real weird part is nobody eats shit sandwiches. So why are we serving it to people? If you want to get better, let me tell you a few things that you need to do better. And I'll tell you a couple of things that double down on and keep doing because they're great, but I'm not going to serve it up in a certain way unless the person actually needs it. So typically I'll start my coaching session and be like, hey, happy to do shit sandwich if you want it, or we can just skip to getting better. And most people just say get better.
Love it. All right, let's go back to the call. That is a great comment.
Company that I work in is based here in Virginia, in McLean, Virginia. That's where our headquarters is. But we've got folks, all around the world and all around the country, obviously. And we have 3 business sectors, primary business sectors on the US portion of the company. The parent company, of course, is a UK company, but we're firewalled from them.
I see. All right, that's great. So I guess I was looking to gather a little more information, understand what you're kind of looking for.
Hey, Steve, pause it for a second.
Yep.
So this is a prime example of reactive questioning and pointless questioning. So he asked them about locations or whatever, got this location data, and did you hear his reaction was, okay, great. Yeah. And now I'm going to ask you some other question, but I'm awesome because I'm asking you questions and not talking. The question was pointless. The answer wasn't heard. And like if it was really a question versus worth asking, then the answer needs to be clarified, or at least you need to make sure that you read it back to them so that your understanding matches their reality. And so like it just shows you like why waste the breaths about all that other stuff walking up to that if all you're going to say is okay, great. Like if that's your reaction to one of my answers, like I'm like, well, why did I just answer that? Okay, great. Like I don't understand that reaction. It's nonsensical.
Discovery is not a survey, and and it's not an interrogation. And the days of the 21 questions to lead a discovery call are over unless they have a real important business impact. Don't have light little surface level questions. In some ways, this actually goes back. Tibor, you and I are old enough to remember this spin selling, the old Rackham seminal work there, where they talked about, problem questions and implication questions are better than situational questions. And if you counted the situational questions in this call, there's a whole lot of them, but there's not a whole lot of problem or implication questions.
None at all. And I think to Mark's point, the guy's just not prepared. So he's, sort of going off a standard, piece of paper that he probably found on his friend's desk.
There's two reasons to ask a question. One is to elicit information so that you can check off that you got that information. The second one is because you hope to understand and you're seeking to understand the person you're talking to. And that was a blatant, like, I got a sheet of paper from my friend's desk that says I should ask about this. I just did it. Check. On to the next question on my list.
Yep.
And it just doesn't help anymore. Versus, hey, why do you have all those different locations? I don't understand. Like, I'm not calling you in UK. Are you a decision maker in the US? You know what I mean? I can ask a million questions that my mind got curious about their internal structure based on that answer. That shows me like I actually care about the person and I'm seeking to understand his situation.
That's a really good point, because that like where you located is really as fluffy as it gets. Versus if that's information that can then help in solving their business problem ultimately, then it's a completely valid thing to do. So I like that point. All right, let's keep on listening here.
Ask, you had a chance to look at some of our videos and maybe some of our websites. Do you have an idea what we do, Kevin?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And before we go on, I should mention that we're that 22nd date may or may not be firm. We're still in the process of trying to schedule folks to come in. So Cassie will reach out to folks.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few other things that other stages we typically work with, different kind of phases, I like to say. But yeah, so from last time you mentioned your organization, you kind of like a third party, you look after your clients and make recommendations and trying to kind of help with their looking after their IT environment. That's sort of in a nutshell what you're and you guys focus on the aerospace industry. Is that correct?
Yep. So, in my role, I'm a solution architect. I'm the chief scientist. Also, I lead the team of solution architects. We have 4 business areas within our business sector, about a $2 billion business or so, and the solution architect.
And I'm going to pause here so as to save us all of the responsibilities. Like, again, it's important to understand the responsibilities, but I think all of us can agree the way it's being executed here is not hitting the mark. So, guys, what would some recommendations be on how would you uncover responsibilities and do it in such a way that the information is relevant?
I like to explore how they've approached similar type of purchases in the past, because it opens up the ability to drill down in the way that we talked about in the first instance, the 3 tips that Mark gave, but it also tells me how close they were to the decision, because the more detail they can tell me as to why they chose to go down the path they chose to, why they bought the vendor that they bought from, how that process unfolded. So if I can get them to talk about a similar type of purchase they've made in the past in their current role, then it gives me some different ideas around responsibility and it allows me to formulate other questions as we go through. One thing that I'd like to add, and I don't want to throw things off, but is anybody noticing that this is not the first discovery call that this guy's had. If you listen to some of the comments, to me, some of the things that he's bringing up should have been covered off in the first call.
Mark, your thoughts on that? I think you're right, and it seems like there's a lot of real surface level stuff that you could search for and look up on the internet. Your comments, your thoughts, Mark.
You mean, Tibor, are you meaning like there's stuff like a qualification call that should have happened prior to this, or what do you
I think one took place. If you listen to the conversation, they make reference to the previous call. So I think that qualification call, I agree with you, took place. I don't think he captured anything, or he wasn't the one on that call and doesn't have the notes from it.
Well, I will tell you, I think that there is a huge gap between, especially if you have specialized sales roles with SDRs and AEs or appointment setters and sales reps, where the information captured in the first call is either looked at 30 seconds prior to the call, or the note taking isn't good enough that the person getting on the call has a real context with which to place the call. So they kind of start all over again. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what you're hearing is this guy's like starting all over again because he has to like hear it for himself to believe it, or he doesn't know it. And either of those situations is wasting this guy's time, unfortunately, because obviously they've already covered this stuff.
And there is a clue in here, and I think maybe it's just hindsight or what have you, but if you listen to the way the guy's willing to give this information, you got to wonder if he is near a decision maker. And at the end of the call, we discovered that he's not. But at this point, the guy's spider senses should be going up as to whether this guy is part of the decision or not.
Yeah. Exactly. Now, an interesting point is I'm manning the questions here, and you guys can speak to this, but an interesting point is some of the people in the audience are saying, hey, look, some of these calls aren't necessarily discovery calls. Now, the funny thing is this call is it's a scheduled call. It was led into like a scheduled call. It was 26 minutes long, but not necessarily viewed as being a discovery call by those in the audience. So I agree with you on that. Guys, submit, if you're listening and you want to submit a good example of a discovery call, we'd love to hear one. So please use the link that I put into the chat box, and you can submit a discovery call that way. I think what we can do here, Tibor, is skip ahead, and you've got a couple of comments right here, and why don't we listen to those? So at this point, the two of these guys start talking about different technologies, and they kind of go back and forth on who cares about what kinds of technologies. But again, you start to hear other opportunities that are missed around why does anybody care about this technology. So let's listen to this one.
Dozens,
Okay, all right. Okay, great. And I think the different platforms you mentioned, VMware is one of the ones that I believe you mentioned.
Well, we're pretty much agnostic of virtualization technology. Whether it depends on what the customer wants, So, the virtualization technologies oftentimes the customers have preference or they're already using them. So, but we work with Microsoft technology, VMware technology, NetApp, everybody. We work with everybody. So.
Okay.
Shouldn't he be curious as to how they determine and why they determine on different projects as to which of the technologies they work with? I'd be curious. Maybe it's just me.
Yeah. Or I would say how, right? So what would you say here? I'd say, how do you determine which technology? Yeah. How do your clients determine which technology you're going to pick and why? Mark, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the guy's stepping all over his toes and just not sitting there listening. If you don't listen, you don't have anything to react to. If you don't have anything to react to, you can't ask good questions.
Oh, very good. Let's keep going here. Well, I want to jump to Tibor's point, and then we'll wrap it up.
This is agnostic as well.
Reducing the number of staff needed. Technologies.
Hang on here. I want to go back to that.
Things like software-defined infrastructure, software-defined networking, software-defined, everything basically is, virtualization technologies, things that allow us to configure large-scale, dynamic workflows or service compositions or infrastructure composition, but while still, reducing the number of staff needed. Technologies that we're interested in.
Okay, great.
Aha! We finally got some meat on the bone, Tibor. What happened here?
I mean, again, I'm not a technology guy. You know, people are surprised I could turn on my phone, but you know, there's so many things that I could have drilled down on as to how and why and so on. And the good thing that this guy had going for him that he didn't exploit at all is there's really two levels here. Like the guy keeps referencing their customers, right? So in a sense, you've got two audiences, which I would argue is double the opportunity to do a proper discovery. Because how do their customers, are they involved in the technology decision, or are their customers strictly judging them by the output and the solution? If they are, what does that mean? So there's a whole bunch of things that this guy, in a sense, the prospect gave him a layup and he just missed it completely. And I think for the exact reason that Mark said, the guy's like checking off these little boxes on his sheet going, great, I got that one answered. You know, maybe I'll get that coffee cart or whatever, but he's not discovering anything other than how to read the sheet in front of him.
Get that $5 Starbucks gift card spiff, right?
Yeah, it would last me half a day.
But you know, what I heard here, and it's hard to hear. I recognize the fact that this call is hard to hear, but what I heard here is the prospect said, well, for doing things, and again, unprompted by a question, but for doing things like reducing staffing and increasing uptime, increasing services for blah, blah, blah. So he started talking about what are some of the things that he's trying to accomplish, or in this case, the end user customer is trying to accomplish. This would have been a perfect opportunity to say, okay, why are they trying to do that? Where are they at this stage of their development right now? Who is this impacting? How is this impacting them? You know, get into some real meat here on how have they tried to solve this problem in the past, and that's what we're not hearing. Mark, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, this guy just gave this guy a treasure chest.
Mm-hmm.
But the dude is only looking at like a couple gold coins laying next to it instead of open up the treasure chest. Like, you know, like he unpacked so much information in that last statement. And, you know, looking at, you know, Steve, this is your software we're looking at. And what I would expect to see in the trends of your call analysis here, if I'm looking at the peaks and valleys of this conversation, is I would now expect the contact to have a minimal silence, but you can see like we have a significant maybe 10% portion where the guy only talks a couple more times, and the rep now talks for that 10% most of the time. I would expect a short spike of help me understand that, and another long tail of discussion from the prospect, then another little short spike and another long tail. That's what I would be looking at visually to see like this guy is listening to the questions and asking another question that doesn't take a lot of like lead up or explanation. It's just doubling down and trying to understand, versus what I'm seeing here is like a good two-sided conversation back and forth, but that's not really what I want to see in a disco.
I love it. I love it. So guys, let's get some calls next time, and we're doing all sorts of different things, all different sorts of calls for Call Camp. Next time we're actually going to do a session on Coach the Coach. So it's going to be all about what are the best practices and the processes for having a call review, call coaching program. So it's going to be a coaching boot camp for our next call camp, completely different than what we've done. But yes, please submit calls. If it's lead follow-up calls, if it's cold calls, if it's scheduled discovery calls, if it's late-stage negotiation calls, we love to hear them. We love to help you get better. I'm going to jump into the questions here and see if anybody's chimed in with some comments and questions while we were playing.
Are you not going to share the outcome of this call?
Well, you know what? Now that you said that, of course we have to. Hold on, I'm going to jump ahead. Want me to just jump right to the end here? I
could tell you what it is, that basically this guy is lining up vendors for Vendors Day, and the outcome is that some admin from IT is going to call this guy and let him know which of the few days that they're setting aside for Vendors Days they could squeeze them into. And to me, he could have got that in the first 2 minutes of the call and actually gone and done something productive, like play with his Twitter feed or something.
Oh man, it's
my last comment is literally, was this a good use of anybody's time? Because the upshot was that an admin is going to call him to schedule a time so he can come into Vendor Day so they can be on a list if and when a project comes up. I mean, that's not discovery, that's death.
On that note, classic stuff right there. Let's take a look at some questions. Hold on here. How do I make this work? All right. I heard I would love to hear more about how to get to the root cause of the issue. So Mark, I'm going to throw that one over to you. So now that we've heard some, not excellent examples, give us some examples of questions that you would ask in the real world, that one of your reps would ask in the real world, that can really get to the root cause of the issue and discover it.
Yeah, so I think it's Tibor put it in plain sight. It's one thing is we ask is, and I've asked in other roles selling completely different stuff, is what are the 2 or 3 things that you look at every morning? Like, what do you wake up in the morning and like look to know if you're doing your job? And then I say, what do these look like now? What would you want them to look like? And explain to me the gap. And that's a series of questions that opens up a ton of information that you can, take down a path. But that's how we do root cause. Like, how do you measure success at your job? What are the 2 or 3 gauges or dashboards or reports you look at? Where do you want them to be? Where are they? And why do you think there's a gap there?
And I think, we drive a simple series, once a gap is on the table or something's on the table, what do they attribute that to? So let's get their view on it, see how it aligns with our view, see how it aligns with the view of those customers that we've been able to help in the past. Then get them to explore out loud what the difference would be, assuming they achieve that state that they want to be, or to use Mark's analogy, if they accomplish those 2 or 3 things in a day, what does that mean to them? Because again, the more that they see it being real, the more that they'll take interest in it. And then I talk to them about what's the downside of inaction, because most people's propensity is not to act. Unless the house is on fire, they can live with some of the quirks. So you have to get them to think about also the risk of inaction. Otherwise, they might just stay where they are. And then help them quantify that, whether, what does that mean to them in increased revenue? What does that mean to them in reduced headcounts or whatever? Get them to quantify it and extrapolate that out over the time of the value. So if somebody buys Outreach and they benefit from it for 3-4 years, that's 3-4 years of return, not just the ROI on the first purchase of the first year. So get them to extrapolate the value over the time of the benefit. But that takes patience. And I think what it takes is uncoupling from the product and really painting a picture together with the prospect, and this guy was not doing that.
I'm going to recap. Mark, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, one interesting thing that Tibor just said is, asking them this idea of, what does inaction look like? So in my basement, we have a ping pong table, and I'm awesome at ping pong, and my family sucks. All right, now, we can attribute that to a lot of time with beer and college buddies in the basement of our dorm, right? So it's nothing more than that, right? But when I play my family, they make me play left-handed. And like, I can still usually hold my own and win a lot of the time, but like, it doesn't feel natural. And the question of what would you do if nothing took place is usually a question that evokes that same kind of a feeling. Like, you can get around it, you can answer the question, but it's not something that usually people are, to me, that I've found, have considered. It's not something they consider in their everyday job. Like, what if I do nothing? They're always just like, well, what could be the difference here? And so I think a great discovery call and a person that masters discovery call can be that kind of like swing coach that can help you through the herky-jerkiness of answering a question that you feel like you should know the answer to, but it's not a question you ask yourself all the time. So I love that question because it helps you, it sets you up to be a more trusted advisor and more of a resource than just someone that's a survey taker, as you help them through asking a question like that they don't often consider. But I would be really prepared if you ask that question to help walk somebody through how to answer it, because most people don't answer that question themselves.
Beautiful advice to end on. So with that, everyone, thanks for joining the call camp today. Submit your calls for future call camps. And I want to thank Tibor and Mark. This was awesome, guys. Thank you so much for all your insights today.
It was fun.
Tibor's a man. Almost as cool as me, Steve.
Buy his books, guys. All right, take care.
Have a great day, people.
Bye.